It is a great pleasure and an honor for me to preside over the first event at the new relocated FCCJ headquarters. And it is also a great pleasure and honor for me to be in the company of these distinguished guests and speakers. Before I say anything else, though, I should add that Mr. Ries, Philippe, and Bill Emmott are here courtesy of the Friedrich Ebert Foundation, which supported the symposium from which this discussion owes its origins, which took place yesterday at Waseda University. I think that all of you, oh, by the way, I'm Andrew Horvath, a former president of this club, and I think that all of you are aware of the digital revolution in the news media. The four speakers are going to speak about this subject from rather different perspectives. But rather than take up your time and theirs, I would like very much for them to begin. We will start with Mr. Yoshihiro Kando, who's the news editor of BuzzFeed Japan, which is a remarkably successful media venture, digital media venture in Japan, and is an exception to the rule, and I think that he will be very enlightening by telling us how this has happened. Mr. Kando, yoroshiku.
Thank you. My name is Kando. Actually, this is my career. I was newspaper journalist until 2 years ago. For 23 years, I worked for Asahi Shimbun. My last career was the New Delhi bureau chief, and I decided to leave and spent 1 year in Montreal with my family and writing 2 books, and actually 1 book on India. The second one is a translated book by Scott Anderson, New York Times Magazine journalist, about the Arab Spring. And then I decided to join BuzzFeed February this year. And I'd like to begin talking from my personal experience, why I joined this BuzzFeed Japan. Like, as you may know, that Japanese labor market is very solid and rigid, and it's not fluid. So if you begin working for one company, you keep working for your life until the age of 60. The same. I began working at Asahi when I was 23. At the age of 46, until the age of 46, I had nowhere else to go, to be honest. Either to be freelance or, completely change my career. But how? Where? Freelancing is freedom to be, starved. Actually, after leaving Asahi for 1 year, I had almost no income, just writing my own book. And publishing a book in Japan is not something you can expect a big return. But when BuzzFeed and also some digital media began functioning in this couple of years, I found, not just me, but some or many journalists found this is the way, this is, alternative. And that's why the journalists began joining digital media in this couple of years. Like, including my fellow editor-in-chief, Furuta. He himself left Asahi 1 year before me, because BuzzFeed was founded in 2015, and he began working for the BuzzFeed from that time. And I joined 2 years later. So why Japanese newspaper, digital media is still relatively weak and newspaper is relatively strong is that the domination market. with solid subscription system. That you may aware that we have 5 national newspapers, and most of prefectures have each just 1 local newspaper. Why? It's media control during wartime, and still ineffective. In 1938, there was a law, national mobilization law was passed in 1938 to mobilize everything, to unify everything for the war. So media, paper supply for newspaper, also put under governmental control. So all the newspapers are ordered to march. So number of newspapers in 1939 was, there were 848 newspapers in Japan. In 1942, there were only 54. We have now 104. So the domination was very, solid and effective, and still going on. No one can enter this market. It's almost impossible to enter this market in newspaper. So what's going on is that now total circulation is declining from over 60 million, 50 million to around 40 million. However, this decline is not so sharp as like in the United States. Because of this domination, that's the first thing. And second reason is that this is the average age of subscribers of Mainichi newspaper and Asahi. Now, at Mainichi, 49% of subscribers are elder than 60 years old. At Asahi, 42.8, Yomiuri, 41.4. This means this people who are elder than 60 years old, who are baby boomers, who born in between 1945 to 55, they are the main subscribers of this newspaper. Now they are aging. What happens after 10 years old? 10 years later. And the reason that now newspaper subscription declining is not just, people don't want to read newspaper. There is another secret. Have you searched Amazon? I found this. Undelivered newspapers are sold on Amazon. Why? There is a secret in the Japanese newspaper business that newspaper publishers send to its, depot more than what is needed for delivery. And these undelivered newspapers are counted as published papers. The real number of published and delivered is different. And each depot is now selling undelivered one on Amazon. As for pets, toilet, and as far as I see, that's Asahi. It's 2,000 yen for 15 kilograms of papers. And it's not just on Amazon. You can see Mercari or like Yahoo, auction and stuff. So that's the real reason for this rapid decline of this newspaper circulation. They want to clear this issue so that they will avoid future lawsuit from advertisers. Because advertisement fee is decided by the published volume. But if there is a difference between published number and delivered number, it's a fraud. So now what's going on is that they are trying to set this issue as soon as possible. And also, there's another secret of Japanese media. They are heavily dependent on other business, which is mainly real estate business. Like this is from Weekly Diamond. Though most of newspapers have lost 20 to 30% of its circulation, they are maintaining their business. The reason is now, this is Asahi's fiscal report. Last fiscal year, media business profit was almost same as real estate department profit. And at TBS, they earn 42% of their earning are from the real estate business. And at Fuji, it's 56%. This means they can survive as company, but not as media. So what's going on in the mind of journalists is that if your employment is still assured, if you cannot write an article, but you are still employed, what to do? The choice is to stay or to die without parachute. I died without parachute, but most of journalists choose to remain. But he's staying on for other reasons. He has a reason to. Yeah, and as we may know that there are many cases of unreported suicide and also karoshi, death from overwork. Especially in Asahi Yomiuri Kyodo, Nikkei, which is destination for the journalists who works for local newspaper or other media. People feel that you cannot go out anymore. So the choice is very limited, and sometimes you choose a very sad way. I know of some cases which is not open. Yeah. But because of this situation, the workforce we are not losing a workforce in the media. The newspaper reporter in US, there were 70,000 in 2008, and now 39,000. But in Japan, it's not like that. We are not losing as many as in the US because of the employment, lifetime employment, and also this the economic situation that newspaper companies are still surviving. And I gave you the overview of Japanese digital journalism in Japan. Actually, this is a real personal view. There are three major news websites, which is ours, BuzzFeed. The second was Huffington Post. And third one is Yahoo Japan. For these 3 years, they began publishing their own original article, like the oral history of World War II, or like reconstruction issue of Tohoku. And these are three major general social political news sites. And other ones are basically business news, which is Toyo Keizai Online, Diamond Online, and Business Insider. And Toyo Keizai and Diamond Online are basically business magazines. They are the online version of their own article. And Business Insider is from America, as you know. And the latest one is Newspicks. Newspicks has a different business model that they are curation site. They recently began publishing their own original article, but mainly they gather links from other website news sites with the comment of curators. And there's another interesting example called Waseda Chronicle. Have you heard of it? No? Yeah. It's investigative report NGO. But as NGO culture is weak in Japan, and I know the main reporter, he also left Asahi. But they are still having a hard time financially. And this is a matrix that I made. That there's a national news and local news, and general news and business news. And national side, with news, business news, Toyo Keizai, Newspeak, Diamonds is over there. And BuzzFeed, HuffPost, general news with national coverage. And there is another local business news site called Minna no Keizai Shimbun. It's a combination of many small local free papers, like Shibuya Keizai Shimbun, like Shinjuku Keizai Shimbun, Hokkaido Keizai Shimbun. There are more than 50, 60 Keizai Shimbun groups. And the last one, local general news, there is no such site, as far as I know. And this is where newspapers can survive. And the real, also there's another, the reason that the digital revolution is still not really taking place in Japan is that it's a lack of journalism school in Japan. There is no place, no school teach you how to write, how to report. What we do is that we are on the job, we are trained day by day by working for newspaper or magazines. So, most of these BuzzFeed, Huffington Post, Business Insider, Newspeak, most of main writers are originally from newspaper or magazines, mainly from Asahi Shimbun, including me. I don't know why. Like at BuzzFeed, we have 7 news reporters, including editor-in-chief and me. And 6 of them are from newspapers. And 5 of them are from Asahi Shimbun. And at Huffington Post, editor-in-chief is also from Asahi, Business Insider as well. Yeah. The reason is, I feel, is that from Asahi, it's difficult to move to other newspaper. Like if I go to, if I'm a liberal, actually I'm a liberal, so I don't have a choice to move to Yomiuri or Sankei. Maybe I can join Kyodo or Mainichi, but Kyodo doesn't hire my age, right? I'm 48.
Yeah, I'm not in the position to answer this question, but yeah.
Right? Yeah.
I'm not.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure you deserve the very good position in Kyodo, but I'm not in the position of hiring, so I can't say that.
I know that even if I'm a position to hire somebody in Asahi, if somebody with 48 years old with this background apply, then I would think, So that's one prime, from a personal point of view, that's the reason that why from newspaper, the editors, senior writers have begun moving to BuzzFeed and Huffington Post and Business Insider. But our strength is that we have balanced report in news and entertainment. Let me briefly sort of advertise us. Because news, social, political, or diplomatic news alone is not sustainable financially. You need some, many aspects that we have so that we can get page views and stuff. And also we have international branches like America, Canada, UK, Australia, Spain, Germany, India, Brazil, Mexico, and also correspondents in Middle East and Africa and China. So we can use their materials. So this is one example. This is the article. This is the article published in the US yesterday, right? So I translated it yesterday into Japanese. I did it with the original name. At lunch, we went to a Korean restaurant in Akasaka with my colleagues, 3 of my colleagues. And then after that, we stopped at the Starbucks. 2 hours later, I found my colleagues were writing the lunch on their article. how delicious these crab kimchis are. And other colleague, she wrote what we saw in Starbucks. Halloween special. They are my colleagues.
Okay, Mr. Kando, this is extremely interesting. However, we have 3 other speakers, and I didn't put down the ground rules, which is my fault.
Okay.
I think we need to limit to about 20 minutes per person.
No.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So we will get back to you at Q&A.
Okay.
Thank you so much, and I think we've all learned a tremendous amount about newspaper business that we didn't know before, thanks to you.
Yep.
Now, let me introduce Mr. Sawa.
Yep.
Who is the author, incidentally, of the segment of the Reuters Institute digital news report for last year about Japan, and who spoke yesterday at Waseda very passionately on this subject. So passionately, in fact, that I have to also remind him that he also has only 20 minutes or less. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for introducing me. My name is Yasuomi from Kyodo News. I've been working as a journalist for 28 years. As he said, I'm a typical Japanese journalist. I've been staying with just one entity, that is Kyodo News, Japan's largest news wire service. But also I got an opportunity to have a break from my work, to have a study of British journalism in the Reuters Institute in Oxford University, and as well as I had an opportunity to go abroad as a foreign correspondent in New York and covering North America and the United Nations as well. Now, I began with the larger picture of the industry of Japanese media. Actually, I found I share the quite similar perspective of what is happening and what is the structure of the media business in Japan, as Mr. Kando said. But I am doing this in a little bit different perspective, a different angle. So as he said, Japan has a very kind of stronghold of newspaper. The newspapers every 1,000 people. The United States has 127,000 circulations of newspapers in total. In the UK, it is a little bit larger, and Germany and in Japan as well. So you can see how big the Japanese newspaper circulations are. And as he said, due to the regulation in wartime in Japan, I don't think it's still effective, but it's still it remains the outcome of the regulation remains still now. That means basically each title has the larger circulation than the Western counterpart. For example, let's see, 436,000 copies per title. That means how big each Japanese newspaper is, comparing to the United States 3,000, sorry. And you can see how major title of national newspapers are. The Yomiuri Shimbun, Asahi Shimbun, much larger than the print circulation. It is only print circulation comparison. The print circulation of the New York Times and the Guardian. So it seems like it was from the previous slide. Even though it seems like Japanese newspaper circulation is huge, but it is not as much as it used to be, like it is 70 years ago. It is not shrinking very rapidly, but it impacts the beneficiality and profitability. 70 years ago, the Japanese newspapers circulation was larger than, statistically, one household had more than one copy of newspaper. Now, they do not. They do shrinking very steadily, not very fast. But I'm afraid the trigger point is coming. As he said, the demography of audience, demography of readership is very much aging. And the majority of the reason of quitting the subscription is not switching the title, because the reader passed away. So there is no way to replace, no way to recover if they quit this subscription, it is not replaced. So why we are so slow, even though we can see the very dooming future? So the one reason is, as he said, the print business is still profitable. We can stay in the warm bed. It is very, as you know, it's very hard to get out of the warm bed if it is very cold outside. I know we have to get out, but it's still tough. That is current situation, in my view. It's my. Oh, by the way, I'm speaking from my personal capacity. It doesn't reflect my Kyodo News opinion. And what is happening in digital news? Is it profitable? Not really. At least I can say it is not as profitable as the print business is or used to be. So people is still hesitant to get out of the box. And it is not just about money. I know I'm speaking to my colleagues, and we have to talk about the quality of journalism and what's happening, what's going on in the cyber world. So, I don't think in Japan, especially, I can't say the vast majority of the communication of the online is as good quality as it used to be in the print like media. And many fake news, hate speeches, right-wingers, and very harassing comments. And it is not very easy decision to get into such kind of world. Finally, I'd like to underline, I'd like to second the view of his about the general environment, general climate of Japanese employment. When I joined the Kyodo News in 1990, it was in the middle of the bubble economy, as you know, I was expected to be there for the rest of my life, the work life. That means until 60 years old. And still, vast majority of my colleagues are doing the same. And perhaps I do, I don't know. I have no idea about my future, and I don't have a crystal ball. But so it is very much ordinary to stay just one company. And I think it is an egg and a chicken thing, but the labor market is not prepared for such kind of mobility. So it is very tough decision to make, like him, to make a move from one place to another. It is not just about journalism. It is also the same in the rest of business world. That means who support startups? They need to keep up the quality journalism. They need the experienced workforce. So where do they come? If they are very hesitant to move around. So how can I say that? So it is the opposite direction to energize the startups. However, even such a very old and very, I don't say that it is stable, but very static situation conventional media, it is changing, steadily changing. The leader is Nikkei, Japan's economic daily. This year, they announced that their paying subscriber count 600,000. It is an amazing number. I can show you in a comparison. This is from an entity about the print publishing. And unfortunately, it doesn't include Japanese media. But if I put the number of the paying subscriber of Nikkei and Asahi Shimbun, it is like this. And it is not just number. It matters. The content matters. The way of reporting matters. As you know, how many minutes do I have?
Not an awful lot, but well, why don't we give you another 3 or 4 minutes?
All
okay.
right.
I'll sell you mine.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, make it
Set the minds. They put their biggest blockbuster, not blockbuster every day, but in their exclusives, they began publishing. They began putting their exclusive out in every evening, not not every small time, like 2 a.m. or 1 a.m. They did previously. They did previously because they don't want to share with their rival papers to put in print. So they kept the most juiciest bit of their news until 1 a.m. or 2 p.m. That used to be like that, and that is kind of common sense of every single newspaper writers, including me. But it was broken by Nikkei newspaper quite recently. They are obviously influenced by the Financial Times, which they purchased recently, because they have making regular exchanges of the digital strategy. And Kyodo, that is very, very late, very slow to change. And even Kyodo is now getting into the digital world, providing audiences with the pure digital, let's say, stories. Anyway, I have to mind up, but still, digital world has a big problem because of the harassment, the cyber harassment. So many people, so many reporters, journalists are affected by cyber harassment, especially. Please have a look at the bottom. It is chilling effect. It is not just about the journalists' personal lives. That matters in the quality of journalism at all, and how we can tackle the problem. I don't think we have the concrete answer in particular. That is what we have to deal with in the very near future. Well, currently, right now, to get into the digital world with better journalism. Especially, you can say that perhaps somebody like David McLeod there can say, we are suffering from trolls. That is much to do with the Japanese climate. It is Twitter users in Japan and comparison with other countries. And so larger part of Japanese Twitter accounts are anonymous. That is a very hotbed of harassment, right-wingers, racist comment, and something like that. So we have much to do with to change this the climate of the digital world, but we have no choice. We have to get out of the box and get into the new digital world to share our views and news with our readership. So what I'm keen to do is share my views and share my feelings and to find better solution together with my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sawa. Before I continue, I need to recognize two people in the audience. One is Fernando Mazzetti, who also took part in yesterday's conference, a former member, former correspondent in La Stampa here in Tokyo, and thank you very much. And also William Horsley, who is formerly with the BBC and is now with the University of Sheffield at the Centre for Media Freedom, if I'm not mistaken. And he will be talking tomorrow at the same time here. So if you liked today, please come back tomorrow for a different take, which will be about the relationship between the decline in print journalism and the increase in dangers for journalists. That relationship will be highlighted by William. And now to move to Bill Emmott. That introduction is very simple because if you don't know who he is, then you really shouldn't be in this room. So Bill is also a former member. Bill went on to predict the bursting of the Japanese bubble and to write an excellent book about it, and then went on to write some more excellent books. And Bill can comment on absolutely everything. Thank you. Okay.
Well, thank you, Andrew, and I'm delighted to be here in the new, wonderful new premises of the club. I often wake up in the morning and wonder who I am, actually. So I'm surprised that Andrew says what he does. I learned an enormous amount from both Kando-san and Sawa-san's presentations and the ones yesterday at Waseda. So I'm just going to make some very simple observations as an outsider. Outsider to Japan and outsider to the digital media, really, as a former lifetime employee of The Economist, who left relatively early in his life because he'd become chief editor and it was time to leave. But I also had all of my career there. And one thing that Kando-san said reminded me of an episode when I was based here in Tokyo, which was that one of the notable times in Tokyo, my Tokyo time here, was when Diana, Princess of Wales, visited Tokyo with her then husband, Prince Charles, and at the reception, one of the reception where we media were allowed to meet her, the highlight for a former president of the Foreign Correspondents Club, Jurek Martin, bureau chief then of the Financial Times, was when he asked her, did she read the Financial Times, she said she used it to line the cages of her children's pets to catch the litter. So just as Kando-san said about the fundamental use for newspapers. Because secondly, the point that he made about the undelivered copies being sold on Amazon prompts me to say that in the evolution of the paper I used to work for, The Economist, which was always more a subscription paper than an advertising-led paper, but nevertheless has in its business experienced a big fall-off in advertising in recent years. A crucial part of the build-up of profitability for The Economist in the last 5 years has been the elimination of wasted copies. That actually there's been a big increase in profit margins on circulation by stopping sending copies to places where they weren't profitable and stopping giving away so many copies and so forth. So I think there is an important business to be removed out of that. Just a few other points. One is that I think observing the evolution of digital disruption in Europe and North America, I would say a general observation, which is that startups are actually a relatively unimportant part of the story, really. I mean, startups are interesting, startups are innovative, startups are disruptive, but the real story is about Facebook and Google and to a lesser extent other platforms rather than direct digital competition. If you look at the business models of sort of the legacy media, they've really been disrupted by Facebook and not by startups. Startups have had an important effect on fragmenting the readership, on sometimes diluting the question of what it means to be a publisher, what it means to be a journalist, because the barriers to entry to digital publishing are so low that we now can't really define very easily what is a journalist. But actually their impact on the business of the major media has been quite minor, I would say. There's some very notable successes like BuzzFeed and Politico and others, but really, the important story is about the internet platforms, and I would just simply add what I think everyone really realizes, which is that a very important story over the next few years is going to be whether or not those internet giants are attacked in Europe and North America by the antitrust authorities, and whether their power will be reduced in the same way as the breakup of Standard Oil by Teddy Roosevelt and Congress in the early part of the 20th century had a fundamental impact in that era. The European Commission is the lead in this. Europe is more active in anti-monopoly action against these American technology giants. But I think it will move onto the American radar soon, and the only question is whether the argument that they need to remain rich and powerful in order to compete with Alibaba, Tencent, and Chinese platforms is the only thing that I think would restrain action against them. Because I think that really for our business, the importance of brand and impact of reliability that the legacy media has is going to be a fundamental part of the battle, and I think it will be in Japan too. For every startup and every worry about dying readers, the question will be how much do you have to spend to build a reputation in this market? I think Michael Wolff, the American media commentator, who has become famous because of a not very good book called Fire and Fury. Actually, his previous book was a much better book, which was called The Future of Television is Television. And the point he was making was that the power of brand and of particularly the engaging storytelling of television in capturing both advertisers and paying viewers really was going to continue to shape the media landscape, and Netflix is part of the television future of television. So in the digital space, we have to try to understand what is the future of written media and of text. And I would ask questions, really, of Kando-san and Tsuwa-san, which is about what do you think Japanese readers want? Because the key people that we need to understand is the reader and what they really want. If you are an outsider and you observe the media giants of Japan, the big characteristic of those media giants is that in a way, they are not disruptive. If you compare Yomiuri, Asahi, Mainichi, Nikkei with their equivalents in Europe, they are much more rigid, much more conservative, much more, in a way, part of the established corporate scene than at least the self-image of the equivalents in Europe is. The equivalents in Europe are much more, as it were, disruptive in nature and organization. I've been working on a new book about women in Japan, actually, about the future role of women, and it has struck me that while the sort of in the evolution of women rising to leadership positions in my country and in the US, the media tended to be at the lead because they were relatively open, flexible, and disruptive organizations. Actually, that's not true at all in Japanese media organizations. So this then leads me to ask, do readers want disruption? Do readers actually want, are they willing to pay for disruption? They may pay for or be part of a clickbait advertising-led model, but do they actually want to have a more disruptive type of startup, or do digital startups in this market actually need to be conservative in approach and so forth? That's my fundamental question, because it seems to me that always the issue is, what do readers want and what are they willing to pay for? And in watching the evolution of the digital media here, that's the thing that will most interest me.
Thank you, Bill. We will we'll ask Kando-san and Sawa-san to hold on to the answers because our next speaker, Philippe Ries, has something which I think is quite revolutionary. Philippe is also a former correspondent here in Tokyo, a former head of bureau chief of AFP. He went on to also be a bureau chief of AFP in Brussels, and then he left AFP for Mediapart, which is what he's going to talk to you about. But some of you may also remember Philippe as the voice of Carlos Ghosn. He is the person who wrote Carlos Ghosn's story about how he saved Nissan and Renault and would have saved a few other companies if they had let him, right?
Well, Tovaz and Mitsubishi Motor.
That's right. Well, also there was, but anyway, I was thinking of Michelin tire. But in any case, I should add, of course, that Philippe is also here courtesy of the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, but and I also cannot resist telling you that, in fact, he left Mediapart and is now a full-time olive farmer in Portugal, and he'll tell you about that after this his fascinating story about a successful venture of a journalistic venture by journalists in France. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you all for being here. I'm, of course, delighted to be back, as always. But Andrew, if you allow me, since the focus is Japan, I will slightly change my presentation based on the information I received yesterday, and that came to me really as a shock. Before coming back to Japan as the bureau chief of AFP in 1998, I spent 2 years in Hong Kong, but before that, for 6 years, I had been the head of the economic department, the chief economics editor at AFP. And I remember now very well that as early as the 91, 92, I became absolutely convinced that the traditional business service of wire services, that is B2B, providing news to newspaper, TVs, and radio channel, had to change. And we had to move progressively from B2B to B2C, that is becoming retailers of news. Of course, that was extremely politically difficult, because then a wire service that would provide news directly to the consumer would go into direct competition with its traditional clients, the newspaper, then the radio channel, then the television. Fortunately, so in the case of general news for AFP, it was out of question. But in the case of economic news, it was completely different, because it was a sort of marginal market that did not really interest the AFP management in Paris. And we were actually allowed in the very first stage of the internet to build up a business of distributing news to non-media companies, and so it was really the start of a process. And coming to Japan, I kept the same ideas, and as you well aware, in Japan, AFP has had for 70 years now a very friendly and profitable agreement with GG Press for the distribution of AFP news to the Japanese market through GG Press. But it was already obvious in the at that time that this model, even in Japan, was being challenged by, and there was a necessity, absolute necessity for AFP, although the relationship with GG Press was excellent, and I suppose continued to do so. Ursula can probably, the current AFP bureau chief, could probably give a testimony on that. That we had to look to a way to make money on the Japanese market in the different way, and for that we had to find a way to go B2C, that is to deliver AFP news in Japanese to the Japanese consumers. And I started discussion with a very small startup called Creative Link on a project that became AFP BB. And then I left Japan for Brussels, and then Andrew said I left Brussels and AFP at the same time in 2008, early 2008, and I completely lost track of that project. And when I arrived in Tokyo 4 days ago, I received an email from Yuki Sanetaka, who was my partner in those discussions, telling me, "Oh, Philippe, I heard you're coming to Japan. Can we meet for coffee or lunch?" And then I said, "Of course, I'm very glad you remember me, so let's meet." And I heard yesterday, so I hope I'm not breaking any business secrets, that AFP-BB has become the largest provider of foreign news in Japan on the internet. They are employing 70 people in Tokyo. They have been approached by Xinhua, that also wants to deliver some news through that platform. I have no idea how is it doing business-like, whether it's profitable or not, but it struck me as an incredible success. And that means that together with the office staff, there is about 100 people working for AFP, directly or indirectly in Japan. And he told me that in the distribution on foreign news, they are ahead of the BBC, ahead of Reuters. I'm not talking about, again, delivering to business. I'm talking about B2C. Okay, so, and it's extremely interesting because when I made the jump from AFP to Mediapart, in a way it was risk-taking because I talked about Mediapart 2.5 years ago here, so that's why, Andrew, I thought I could maybe shortcut on.
No, but for these people, I think it may be news.
So we, interestingly, the business model of Mediapart was indeed revolutionary at the time because we created a new paradigm whereby if you want to get news on the internet, you need to pay for it. And 10 years ago, it was absolutely revolutionary. The conventional wisdom was that everything on the internet is for free. Maybe if you specialize in financial and economic news, you can have a paying audience, but for general news, no way. And a very famous business guru, also, although he's mainly famous for his numerous mistakes, predicted that Mediapart would be dead within 3 months. actually, all the deads are the other pure players that started under the conventional model, that is, news is for free, and revenues will come from advertisement. All those have disappeared, and Mediapart still stand. I can still stay although I left Mediapart in August after 10 years, because during the event of 1968 in France, there was a very famous motto, 10 ans ça suffit, 10 years is enough. So I saw that would apply very well to me. And I wanted to, in fact, yes, become a little more serious in the olive oil business. The company Mediapart, so the business model was that one, and we thought people will pay for a different type of news. So we had to be selective, we would not cover everything, and we have to be investigative. It's the nuclear engine is really scoops, exclusive investigation, even. And this was a very sensible proposition, since the general climate in the media, with the falling circulation, the necessity to cut on journalism, on resources, on foreign correspondent, was making investigation almost impossible to finance, because it's expensive. If you need somebody to work for 3 weeks, even sometimes 3 months on one single story, you have to pay him correct a normal salary. During that time, it will cost a lot of money, and you could not, if you cannot afford it, of course, that's where you cut expenses first. The first 3 years were extremely challenging, and by 2011. I would not say the future of Mediapart was in play, but it was getting very, very complicated. And then came the first real big scoop, the famous Bettencourt case. It was the case of one of the richest women in the world, aging, very frail, that was being manipulated by some unsavory characters with a political dimension to it. And we broke that story, and the circulation brutally increased to 50, I mean, the subscription brutally increased to 50,000 per month, 50,000 paying subscribers on a main monthly basis. That was above the break-even point at that time, and then other scoops followed. Mediapart has been profitable ever since. Very interestingly, we turned down any offer of public subsidies, while in France, the state is spending more 1 billion euros a year to subsidize the French press in all sorts of ways. And that, of course, the state subsidies is absolutely not a solution to the problem of the media. On the contrary, it's only making the situation worse, because, as it is famously said, you cannot run with crutches. I mean, it doesn't help at all. Now, the future of Mediapart seems to be well established. The subscription reached 150,000 subscribers last year, but that was a presidential election year. It looked from Japan, it might look tiny, but you have to remember that the mainstream newspaper like Le Monde and Le Figaro are selling less than 250,000 copies a day. So 150,000 subscribers, I think it's down now and stabilized to about 140,000. Now, in terms of the content, in terms of the business model, it has been a resounding success. The less shiny part of the Mediapart adventure is, and that's comes a bit to the question Bill asked about what do the readers want. One question mark for me about Mediapart is whether this success can be replicated in a different political and ideological environment from France. As you know, there is in France a very strong tradition of militancy, going back probably to the French Revolution, mostly leftist, and there is no question that a lot of Mediapart readers, difficult to say exactly what proportion, but a lot of Mediapart readers did not subscribe to an online journal, they joined a cause. And investigation is a very good cause. I mean, it's a cause that all journalists should pursue and follow. But the question mark is whether and on the other hand, as I said in a paper that maybe the club can reproduce, we know very little about the Mediapart subscribers, the readers. If you look at the commentaries, you would probably think all of them are really hard leftist, sometimes extremely hostile to the journalists, practicing a sort of bullying against us. But in fact, out of 140,000 subscribers, the active commentators are maybe 2,000 or 3,000. So it does not give you an exact idea of what the readership is way larger, much more diverse. But it's an interesting challenge, and I think that it's not my business anymore, but I think if Mediapart wants to become a success for the coming decades, they have to find out exactly what the answer to the question that Bill asked. What exactly are the readers looking for?
Thank you, Philippe. And you have just given me a very good idea. In fact, I will give your talk, which you presented to me in a form of paper, to the #1 Shimbun, and I'm hoping that they will publish it. Before moving on to questions from the floor, I would just like to give Sawa-san and Kando-san 1 minute each to answer Bill's question.
Okay. About what?
What do you think your readers want?
Yeah, this is the most important point that I feel. That I think you filed a story yesterday, or maybe today. I think you filed a story yesterday. How many of you know how many people have actually read that article? And how many time, how long the readers spent on your article? Do you know that? No. You don't know demographics of your readers. You have no data. This is the reality. And what we're doing now is to get these data and to analyze and to find a way how to deliver the same news in more effective way. One example, just one example. There was a case of a Korean Supreme Court case of forced labor day before yesterday. I think you've seen a flood of articles throughout Japan. But I don't think people could understand whole situation by one article, right? No. And especially our main target is millennium generation, people in 20s, 30s. They don't know even the history. So I filed a big story explaining for the people without basic knowledge of this issue, but newspapers cannot do the same. So this is our challenge, what we are doing right now. Yeah.
Thank you. Sawa-san.
So talking about whether the readers and basically citizens want this disruption by startups, I'm not very sure, but I don't think, as you said rightly, the rigid and conservative as describing media society as our general public in Japan. so are general public in Japan. We are not like standing out from others. I think they do the general, what's the matter here? So if you ask us like what they want, perhaps they really want a funny, interesting story. And that is what's happening in the cyber world. They're getting more and more silly, like the photograph of cats or something like that. But what journalists have to deal with is striking a good balance between what they want and what they need. So perhaps we had been in a very strong part of society. We are very easy to impose our views on what they need. That is what is the reason what is happening. The readers are leaving us very rapidly. So as he said, we need analysis. We need what the readers are really, really interested in. However, it makes dumbing down at the same time. So we need balance. And if we combine this kind of stimulation from startups and our like perspectives of journalists, good journalists, I think that is the answer.
Thank you very much. Now, let me ask for questions from the floor. Working press first, and please identify yourself. Yes, I think Ilgis. Yes, thank you. And questions, not speeches, please. One per person at a time. Thank you.
Hello, thank you for being here today. My name is Ilgin Yorulmaz, and I'm a freelancer. So I resonate a lot with so many things you said about employment, harassment, business models, and everything. Very quickly, I just want to know, so this revolution that we're hoping will come, will it come from the readers? Will it come from collaborations like the Nikkei and Financial Times and best practices? Where do you see this coming from? Because we've been seeing it in the States, where I worked before I moved here. And also, I want to ask specifically to Kando-san, perhaps. You mentioned about local news, and local news is in decline in media in the States. So do you see a chance here in Japan that local news will be covered? Because I think there are amazing stories, but hardly anybody covers them, perhaps. And so that's my question. Thank you.
So you're asking this from Kando-san or from everybody?
The
last person was Sawa-san.
The last part was for Kando-san, but the rest is for everybody.
Well, if that's the case, then we'll have the answer lasting until dinner. So why don't you...
Okay. Bill Emmott, please, then.
Okay, thank you. All right. So Kando-san and Bill Emmott. Okay, thank you.
No, you first.
Okay. As for local news, I think unlike United States, local newspaper in Japan is surviving as bulletin board. People want to know. What people want to know is the name. They want to find their friends or neighbors' name on the paper. They want to know the result of local sports. They want to know who died in the same district. Actually, when I was working for Asahi, I worked for 3 local bureaus, and every time I was asked by local newspaper people, local Asahi leaders, that we should publish name of the people who deceased in a week. That's the main, one of the main business of local newspaper. That people want to know who died and who should they want to go for mourning and So this is where local news is still surviving, and this is not the point that you mentioned. But for the local news, I think the Yahoo Japan is working as aggregator of each local newspaper's news. So local news are now being reported and spread through Yahoo Japan. We are trying to do something, but we are still too small. Now, what we're focusing on just Okinawa only.
Bill.
So will the revolution be televised, is the question. So I think, I don't know what the answer is really, but I would observe that really the real revolution, really to repeat myself, the real revolution in the media has come from the platforms, from their platforms' dominance of the advertising business. But the secondary revolution, maybe that's the sort of first overthrow of the old regime, but then the secondary revolution is coming from writers of all kinds exploiting the low barriers to entry into providing information and analysis, and readers enjoying this, but primarily enjoying it being free. So that there's still a relatively, based on surveys and detail about how many readers seem, particularly in the Reuters Institute global study of digital news spread, still a relatively low level of people willing to pay. The highest willingness to pay is, of course, in the best behaved countries like Scandinavian countries, willing to pay. I would say that, of course, Japan must follow the Scandinavian route rather than these nasty, good-for-nothing British and Americans who will take everything free of charge. But so I think it's the readers have enjoyed it, and then writers have exploited the low barriers to entry. There is some sign of changing in readers' habits, I think, in willingness to pay, but it's rising, but still from a low base. And that willingness to pay comes with a sense of discrimination about what you want to buy and what you want to support. And the notable story in the British media has been, in the last 1 to 2 years, has been The Guardian, which was, I think, made what I would say was a terrible mistake of deciding to be free of charge, building up an enormous editorial cost, trying to become a free of charge publication in Australia and America as well as Britain, and losing a lot of money. It had built its business on cross-subsidy from other publications, so like a Japanese media organization, or cross-subsidy from other businesses. Then it was really using up its endowment very quickly until it cut costs and started asking readers to donate. So it's not a subscription model, it's a donation model. And at the end of every article at The Guardian, you get asked, would you please make a donation? It's rather annoying, actually, but nevertheless, they seem to have succeeded in getting back to close to break even through this. So maybe this is part of a change in readers' attitude, and some of it is probably the cause-related issue that Philippe mentions about Mediapart. Subscribers to The Guardian are actually donors donating to a cause, but I'm not sure that we will see how it develops. But the real future has to be in finding things that readers are willing to pay for, and therefore journalists innovating in defining what they do in such a way that readers find it compelling. So that, I don't know, the revolution is hardly begun in that sense.
Anthony.
Anthony Rowley, freelance. My question really follows up on what Bill Emmott was just saying, so it's addressed primarily to him.
Oh dear.
The media, the print media, obviously spend an awful lot of money on preparing content. That includes employing staff, training staff, and so on and so forth. How much power do they have, and it's a very general question, how much power do they have to pass on more of the costs of this content to the internet platforms of various kinds? And if they don't have the power to pass on more of the costs, then would it be in their interest to stop providing it?
I wish I had a more sophisticated answer to that question, Anthony. I really bowed out of media management sort of before that issue became as it were, a weekly and daily preoccupation for editors and executives. But I guess my outside observation would be not very much power. That rather, as with music streaming, there is some ability to get a bit more of the margin back, and I think in the negotiations that have been going on with Google and Facebook, there has been some clawing back, but I would say nowhere near enough to make the difference. I think so. Can they withhold? It would be a courageous decision, as they say. And yeah, would I withhold? I don't know. Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah,
Philippe, I think you had something to add to that.
Well, I must point out that when we started in 2008 with this subscription model, we really were the only one. Now there is paywalls everywhere. So the situation has changed greatly. Not only the Financial Times or the Economist, but the New York Times, you get 5-story free, and then and so on. The Nikkei newsletter is also by subscription. So it has been changing dramatically. Now the issue of the platform is a complex one, because you cannot get Mediapart news. You can access Mediapart through the platform, but if you want to enter, you got to pay at the entrance. So, and that's what should be the role of the platform, period. So I'm definitely against providing the news free of charge to the platform. It's a losing game, and it has been proved again and again and again. And the proof is that all our competitors as pure player, that is online journal not created by established newspaper, but created from scratch as a startup, at least in France, that choose the model of relying on the platforms, on Google, on Yahoo. They just disappeared. They do not exist anymore. We have Mediapart, as I left, the staff went from 30 to 85. The operating margin is the after-tax profit last year was 16%, 1/6. You can look at a lot of media companies. I mean, when they make 2 or 3%, they're very happy, because most of the time they're actually losing money. So it's really the only way to go. The question is how you get there, and you have to know your reader. But I just want to add one caveat to what was said about all those studies about the readership, the number of hits, and that's one. We decided from the onset that the journal would be made by journalists. And at the beginning, because it was a very small operation, 25 journalists, it was the functioning of the newsroom was completely horizontal. There was hardly any hierarchy. And we basically covered the story we wanted to cover in a very, and I must say, even in a very selfish way. And it produced some very strange results. And in my case in particular, because as an economic and financial reporter, and we started in 2000 and started the test run, the beta of the site in September 2007, that is at the onset of the financial crisis. And I wrote very, very long. Unlike at AFP, where we were limited to 600 words, I could go 2,500. Extremely sophisticated story, I mean, complex with a lot of input, a lot of data, and it worked very well. And I never asked myself, is it okay for the readers? It's a question you should never ask. Never ask. If you start by second-guessing what the reader wants, when I was talking, what is important is who the readers are, not what they want.
Well, I'm glad to know that elitism is alive and well. It's always been alive and well in Japan, which should be the topic for another panel discussion. But Sawa-san, do you have something you might want to add? Or?
Yeah, that is a problem. So, when we stick to the profitability, the paywall is the best choice, I think. But that is what's going on here in the paper business, because it's kind of a paywall. if we hesitate to go to online for free, that means we are losing our influence in the society. That, again, I have to say, balance. And perhaps you are on free model, but how to expose our stories more to influence and to have a good impact on the society, as well as keeping a profitability better. Mm-hmm. That is almost contradiction, but that is what we are doing.
Okay. David McNeil, did you have your hand up? Okay, I'm sorry, you were so far away. Okay.
Sorry, I thought we were running out of time. I was just about to skip out of the door. Well, thanks a lot. I have two questions, if that's okay. The first is a sort of very easy one, which is why do so many of the refugees to online journalism seem to come from the Asahi? I wonder if that's because of the problems it's had over comfort women and other issues, or is there some other issue I'm missing? The other question is a broader one, which is about whether Japan has actually been quite prescient the way it's handled the move online. You know, it hasn't done it in this kind of chaotic fashion the way that the American and British media have done it. The Guardian's begging letter is a perfect example of the kind of consequences. Japan has done it in a much more kind of structured way. Does that look like it's the better way in hindsight? Thank you very much.
Okay, so I guess we should ask Mr. Kando to speak about his departure from the Asahi.
Actually, comfort women issue is not really a big issue for me, at least. But this is real personal feeling. But when you work for Asahi, you are liberal, right? And when you want to change your career, where to go? So Kyodo, I'm too old to apply. Mainichi, yeah, it's good newspaper, but doing same job for less payment. It's not, good choice. So I have this feeling for like 10 to 15 years that I'm feeling some problem in newspaper, but there is nowhere else to go. If you're, let's say, conservative, maybe you'll be hired as speechwriter in the other administration, like speechwriter of this administration from Nikkei.
Yes.
And that's, I think, one of the personal reasons that some Asahi reporters are leaving. Yeah. And
Well, the next question was basically about how the move from print to digital has actually been much more orderly, if slower, than in other countries where it's been chaotic. And is this a good thing? I think if I've
actually, it's the print to digital shift in the same company is not really happening. Let's say Asahi has paywall. And mine as well. But the price for monthly subscription of digital version is almost same as print version. Because they need to protect the suppliers, Asahi dealers, or each newspaper dealers. If you set cheaper price, it will kill all the dealers. That's why they are putting the same price. Except Nikkei. Yeah, except Nikkei.
Actually, I can add to that. I just recently subscribed to the basic version of the Asahi online.
That's discount.
And that's only 960 yen, and I strongly recommend it. It's much better than the 3,900 yen of the print version and the so-called premium digital version. So I think maybe what's happening now is that the Asahi is waking up to the fact that it has to appeal to readers who do not have the equivalent of $40 a month to pay for a paper that's delivered late.
Agree.
So, okay, so anyway, but sorry to include that.
No.
Okay, do you want to, Sawa-san, do you want to comment on the...
Yes, just one thing.
Yes, okay.
It's relatively slow, and from... as Ms. McNeil said, it might be, from the hindsight, the better way to do. However, it is really, really from the hindsight. And I think, in my view, my personal view, it is only the procrastination. And so procrastination sometimes pays because we can learn from the predecessors, and I think it works. However, what is happening now is not very much good result with such kind of learning from others. And nobody knows so far, nobody has found the best answer or correct answer. So we are still on the way of experiment, perhaps.
Okay, yes, well, William, you'll have an hour tomorrow. Important question.
Relevant to...
Absolutely, thank you.
Yeah?
Yes, okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I take your point entirely. But on a quick point of information to you, Kando-san, I know that in the UK, the Guardian, the FT and the others have a large team of people that do analytics. And they know minute to minute who's reading which stories. And on that basis, they are able on day for each edition, each update, to decide how to play the story. Sometimes maybe that could be regarded as an interference in a good judgment, but it's definitely there. But may I just throw a question, because I think there's an unanswered question here. Because Philippe has just explained to us how in France it's possible to develop a successful online media which focuses on telling people news that is not being out there in the rest of the market. It's breaking news, scoops. BuzzFeed exists to do that, and in America they made a huge impact, for example, by publishing the Christopher Steele dossier about Trump and Russia. And they get a lot. And surely in Japan, the message we've got from today is that the business is too conservative here. The Kisha clubs are a cartel. Yes. Now here you are, you're the new players. You have the entire market to tell a different story, the untold story, the voice of civil society, and the untold story. Don't you?
Thank you. Yeah, that's what we are trying to do. Yeah. As for data, we, as BuzzFeed Japan is still a small body, we are doing on our own. And we have 7 reporters, and every Friday at noon, we meet and bring the article we wrote this week, and discuss why this was read, why this wasn't give an impact. But this is not just to, have more page views. We are journalists, so we know that page view alone is not, page view should not rule us. If we do that, we have to go to scandal.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or like gossips. Yeah, there should be a balance for that. Yeah.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, actually, they are doing a very good job, and they are very good impact on the society, like with what's revealing about the wrongdoing of somebody, and they are investigating, they are revealing, and that stirs us up. That works, that matters on the quality of journalism. And so I hate to say this, like school teachers things, but we have to get back to basics.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much. That's a good point to end on. Is there anyone here who is a working journalist and must ask a question and will not be able to sleep at night if he or she does not? Okay, then thank you very much for joining us, and please do come again tomorrow when you can hear William discuss or give you some pretty sad details about journalism safety around the world. Thank you very much. And before I close, I'd like to give honorary memberships, especially to Mr. Kando and to Mr. Sawa. And we hope that they will use this to come and talk to us and eat with us regularly. They can start eating with us starting November 7th. Until then, it's pastries and cold coffee. Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay.
See you. Yes, indeed.